Thank you. So I'm going to get my excuses out of the way first. So Jan was talking to me earlier saying, I hope your slides are funny. And I said, what do you mean funny? It's software people. They're really detailed and dry. And then I was talking to Lisa saying, you know, I'm about to conclude this section with a whole bunch of what I see as trends in the industry, and I'm a sample size of 1. And Lisa represents the whole market. So who knows about statistical significance of a sample size of 1? What is that?
Can you repeat?
I was trying to set it up.
Nothing.
Yeah, nothing. So I'm nothing. So what I want to talk about actually is not anything technical. It's more kind of business trends and strategic business type decisions that will eventually play out on the types of roles that will be there in the future. And hence the conclusion on the types of roles. So some of these words aren't tech words. So equifinality. When I did work with Collard at Westpac, was my prior bank, they were, broadly speaking, they're a bank and so is Kiwibank, and so we're trying to achieve the same things, but it turns out there's more than one way to skin a cat. And so a lot of the things I want to talk about will manifest themselves differently within the different contexts that you work. But actually a lot of business strategy is kind of heading in the same direction. It just plays out differently and at different timings. What I didn't do is get my excuse in early also about these were done. I was in Wellington yesterday, and so between 9 and 11 o'clock last night, which is really why my slides aren't that funny. So a lot of these trends will come in all of the organisations. I'm also talking from the context of corporates. So in my 4 countries, I've pretty much worked in organisations between 1,000 and 120,000. So this is not really at the small software company scale. However, I will give you a bit about non-functional requirements and MVP. So live situation earlier today, to speak back to Ben, who I keep pointing over there, but he's not sitting over there. You know, the architects and developers talking about with the client who's being delivered to that this form takes 1.5 seconds to return the result to the customer. That's not good enough. And the business owner going, you know, our current version of this takes 45 seconds to return to the customer, right? So we're taking 1.5 seconds. So that 1.5 millisecond thing actually, when you get to a big corporate with the complexity of their systems, manifests, and as a developer or an architect or many other technical roles, you've got to go, wouldn't be what I'd do, but you know, your money. Okay. So next bit, trend. Who's heard of the cloud? Of course you've all heard of the cloud. And so the evolution here really isn't about the technology of the cloud, it's about the way businesses have thought about using cloud compute. And you know, also between 9 and 11 o'clock last night, I didn't have any animations on here, so I can't really do the big reveal on these slides. But when the cloud was first came about, actually most large corporates viewed it as a cost-saving opportunity. So I don't need my own servers in my own data center anymore. I can allow someone else to manage my data center. They've pretty soon, including the things like having mobile phones with the high-powered applications that they've got, and now a much better developing software as a service industry. It's eventually moving to a platform business model, and you've all heard of Facebook and Amazon and Google, and well, that's going to provide some really interesting opportunities for businesses. And I think my next slide doesn't quite talk about it. I'll get there in a second. Actually, I'll get there when the time's right. So because of this new technology, there's also some new development practices there. So 20 odd years ago when I started in software, I was an analyst programmer doing client-server application development, which pretty much doesn't exist anymore. Apart from, it turns out that in the Ministry for Primary Industries, that application that I was writing 24 years ago is still running. The team of new grads want it replaced because it's rubbish. The business can't justify the cost of replacing it because it's only got about 20 users. So the types of things that you guys may very well be learning about, continuous integration, continuous deployment, the degree to which you can automate your testing rather than manually test, figuring out how you start to get good at using the power of the cloud to start doing things like infrastructure as code, rather than I've got my own infrastructure and my own infrastructure team and I'm doing all that sort of stuff. The degree to which, if you've got more than one software as a service, they typically only integrate via APIs. They don't necessarily natively collect, and APIs, at least in a large corporate, is an emerging understanding because we've got a lot of, maybe not the current bank, but there's still people coding on COBOL within banks. There's still an awful lot of C++. There's still an awful lot of these old languages that I'm in my mid-40s. A lot of my team now are in their late 50s to mid-60s, still working on these things that really were around kind of when I was a kid, and certainly before you guys were kids. Product ownership led from digital, but actually becoming far more common across all sorts of product, driving an awful lot of interesting internal corporate conversations around how do we structure that, how do we actually get that ownership. Is there a difference between software ownership and an actual physical product that we own? How do we get that behavioral accountability that if you're really owning the product, you actually want the financial cost or the financial income to also be with you so that you understand the feedback from the decisions and from the code that you're making so that you can get a bit of tension in that what is my MVP versus what do I really think that I need to do in order to get that product released. And then enterprise lean and agile. That's actually the bit that I've practiced some versions of this on 3 continents in very different contexts. And there is genuinely no one way to be agile. There is no one way to think about how you get a cross-functional team working. For me, and this is probably a personal philosophy, this genuinely is about agile isn't a new process to overtake or to replace a waterfall process. It's a fundamentally different way of thinking and a fundamental way of saying every day I've got to be better than yesterday. And so this is a bunch of the group here have probably turned up to learn a bit, and I'm sorry if I disappoint by not teaching you very much. But for me, that also is a continuous journey for me. The next bit, transaction cost reducing. So this is really where it gets complicated. So, and it's where, when you eventually get to senior management, you decide you need to do an MBA. And so I spend a lot of my time in kind of contemporary management strategy thinking about stuff like this. A big corporate only really exists because at a point in time to offer its business model, it made more economic sense for all of that functionality to be owned by the corporate. And as the cost of doing business in a community and in a network drops because of things like APIs and cloud compute and software as a service and CI/CD and a bunch of other things, there's actually more and more cost pressure on an organization to evaluate whether it wants to remain as an organization or whether it wants to deliver its customer outcome via an ecosystem. And for me, that's a massive trend that I see is going to be difficult for banks, but not just for banks, for a whole bunch of industries that historically have needed these really large corporates in order to deliver an integrated and safe customer outcome. So that is a bit, again, I've actually got to give a disclaimer, this is not Kiwibank policy, this is Mike's opinion. But I think that this is not. So there's books by Brett King, Banking 4.0, which basically talk about this. Most corporates are talking about some form of digital disruption or disintermediation. Kiwibank actually, I'm pretty proud of, takes the step of sponsoring a Kiwi FinTech accelerator so that it's actually trying to get amongst working with organisations that are potentially going to disrupt itself as a part of its forward-looking view to how do we work in the future. And so this is something genuinely that all big companies are thinking about, whether it's oil, which probably has a bit of an advantage because the cost of infrastructure is really hard to reduce that transaction cost. But for companies that rely on what used to be proprietary technology solutions to deliver an integrated customer outcome, those things are changing. So that all adds up to what do I see as increasing demand. Remember again, this is from a corporate perspective. So a lot of these things when I talk about as a service companies, potentially what happens is some of the old demand that corporates needed shifts and is transferred to organisations like Ben's. And it also means that there's potentially a lot more opportunity for smaller organisations to become a lot more global, which is actually a really big and interesting thing for a company like New Zealand, which historically has kind of felt like it's suffered on, it's a long way from everywhere, how do we produce a global company? Actually, digital is a really interesting proposition for producing a global company. And so what do we talk about? I haven't really talked about AI, but there's a whole bunch of implication around AI. I have a suspicion that even if someone's data, name it fast data platform, data warehouse, data lake, big data, however it's called, they might house it somewhere else, but that will remain pretty proprietary because that's actually where the core value in your organisation is going to be as you move forward. So skills in how to use that data to make better decisions or to make predictive decisions or to provide a better customer service, they are only going to continue to grow in the 5 to 10 year time horizon. That's the link to data analytics. And I joked about 24 years ago, client server stuff was, yes, there's a stored procedure that links your application to your database. Now there's technologies that just blow my mind away, the SMAC technologies and Kafka and real-time streaming that are unbelievable. They certainly aren't overnight batch like we used to have to do to populate a common data warehouse. Integration, almost a bit passé, but except when you go into corporates and you talk about integration using APIs for a COBOL system or for a core banking application or for a bunch of other things that are still old school applications that are going through transition. Very, very hard to find. CI/CD skill set, depending on where you're at, that is a hard skill to integrate into legacy technology, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. Much, much easier in digital or in application or in all of that fun stuff, but it doesn't mean that there isn't huge value in being able to build those skill sets into core, slightly more legacy applications. And for us, huge skills shortage. Don't know whether Lisa's going to confirm. Test automation engineers, same deal. Right? Testing isn't about a second-rate programmer anymore. Testing is a full contact programmer. Test-driven development, continuous testing so that your test is known to fail until you've got the code in that passes it. This is hard stuff to do, hard stuff to get right, and is a massive, massive skills shortage. Very, very hard for us to buy that skill set in, and so I personally spend an awful lot of time with our test practice trying to grow and build that capability. Configuration and multiple software as a service solutions, we kind of get technical analysts to do a bit of that configuration at the moment. But it's almost like an on-off switch for different software as a service providers, trying to figure out what the presentation layer will be eventually to the customer. Actually, it's quite a skill set, and it's, again, also easy to do if you're talking about configuration of a single application, quite difficult to do when you're trying to integrate multiple as a service layers. And then full contact product owners, I kind of gave that one away. The product owner that used to be a project manager but that has never really owned the P&L for the product that they do, it's kind of a bit what we see, just like Scrum Masters who have got the same project management background. Not really a business accountability mindset. Not really a have to have the hard conversations to make those trade-offs mindset. And I see more and more of these skill sets being needed in order to get, when you talk about enterprise agility, that's a hard skill to fill. It's an almost impossible skill to teach. You only learn it through getting scars on your back by doing it. So this isn't the read the Jeff Patton, guide to being a product owner. This is you've got to have lived and breathed and made mistakes. And this is another thing where, for me, super exciting. As you get more senior, your role is basically organisational politics, not hands-on. These types of roles at a senior level are all about organisational politics and the bottom line P&L of the organisation. So what's decreasing demand? I had to cut this short because I was too scared about scaring people. Traditional manual testing, tons of it about, but my God, it's boring, personal perspective. And actually, you can't get a highly agile, highly adaptive organisation if you're still doing tons and tons of manual testing. Links really closely to CI/CD. You're never going to get to, as a bank, the Amazon levels of 20,000 releases per day, but you might get to one release a week, and you'll only get there if that release doesn't take you 4 days worth of manual steps to get there, which is why CI/CD is so interesting. Waterfall style project management. I think like Ben said, they try and remove that interpretation layer. Requires the old school devs and tests to grow a little bit of EQ. Also requires some of the business to pick up some of the slack that they used to be able to blame a project manager for. And then finally, business analysis. This is potentially one of the hard areas. I was going to throw in change management. because it's all grouped in the same bit. These are things that if you're a full contact product owner, you actually need to be thinking about and having skill sets in yourselves, and you potentially draw on those other skill sets from cross-functional team members, but you may not need that dedicated role. And so this, remember, not a today, but in a 5 to 10 year kind of time horizon, I almost guarantee you that Lisa's going to say, we've got a massive shortage in business analysts, we've got a massive shortage in project managers today, and she's probably right, she certainly is from the recruitment market perspective. I think over time that's going to disappear, and bang, 0 seconds left.